Welcome, everybody, to this absolutely incredible session on bargaining tech from the Center for Future Work and Webinar. Future Work webinars. It's later in the day in Saskatchewan. My lips are not totally working. Strategies for shaping technological change to benefit workers. My name is Barb Byers. I have a long history in the labor and feminist movement, and I'm going to be helping with the moderation today. So I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited about the event. I'm excited about the turnout. I'm excited about the discussion that we can all have, because we're here to launch a new paper from the PowerShare project written by Jim Stanford and Kathy Bennett on the ways that unions can influence the evolution of technology in our workplaces through collective bargaining. Now, that full report, called Bargaining Tech, Strategies for Shaping Technological Change to Benefit Workers, emphasis on the last part, to benefit workers, is available from the Center for Future Work website, centerforfuturework.ca. So today we're going to hear a presentation on the paper. We'll hear a couple of concrete examples on how union collective bargaining strategies can make a real difference in how technology is experienced and how its costs and benefits are shared. And then we want to leave time for some of your questions. And you've already been sending in questions, so you're already into this. Before I turn it over to Jim to introduce the work that he and Kathy have been doing, I do want to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on to today. So we're in a virtual situation, but I'm speaking to you today from Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan, the lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis. So I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands that we each call home. We do land acknowledgements to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility in improving relationships between nations, and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From all across the country, we acknowledge the ancestral and the unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. With this in mind, I invite everyone to join me in just a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and the mistakes of the past, and to consider how each of us are and can, in our own way, trying to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Miigwech, merci, thank you. I want to point out that PowerShare is a project led by the Center for Future Work with support from the Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives and the Atkinson's Foundation. And we thank both the CCPA and Atkinson Foundation for their participation today. I get the pleasure of introducing Jim Stanford, economist, director of the Center for Future Work. Jim is known to many of you from his years working as a union economist, and from all those times we cheered for him when he was on TV, taking on those other people who call themselves economists. And he's one of the authors of this report. He's got a long resume, and I won't go at it all, but I want you to know that from my perspective, Jim has always been there for us, even when he was working at a distance from Australia. He's had influence. He's creative, he's visionary. He explains complex subjects in ways we can get into and then feel empowered by. And that's how you empower people, so that they can understand the information and move forward. So Jim, it's over to you.
Barb, thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for that beautiful land acknowledgement. So important, especially at this time in our history. And thank you for your years of leadership to our movement. I'm really grateful also to the other participants in the webinar today, to our panelists, Jan and Bob, who we're going to hear from later, and especially to my co-author, Kathy Bennett, who's going to say a few words in just a minute. And I do want to add my thanks to the Atkinson Foundation and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, who've been very, very generous about sharing their support for the event and our whole project. This is actually the third paper in the series of power share papers that we're sponsoring through the Center for Future Work, and none of that could happen without the support from Atkinson and the CCPA. So thank you. This is part of the Power Share project series of papers. We've had two other papers, one on COVID and how it's affecting work, and one on workers' voice, the theory and practice of workers' voice. So this one on bargaining technology is the third. And there'll be several other papers in the series in the coming couple of years. And the full paper is there on our website. There's the link below. I do want to stress that all research is collective, but this research was really collective. When we started this, when Kathy and I started this project, we reached out to trade unionists and other researchers about sharing their experiences about how technology is affecting work and workers, and how unions and the labor movement are mobilizing and confronting those challenges. And we got such a positive, helpful response, including from Jan and Bob's unions, who we'll hear from later, but dozens of others who helped out. So I want to make a special thank you to everyone who contributed to this paper. And your ideas are all there, including in that 100-page technical appendix. If anyone has been brave enough to open the PDF yet, you'll see that the report is there, but the appendix has a very rich listing that I'm hoping will be very useful for people in the movement in years to come, based on all of the suggestions that we got. Now, before I start running through the highlights of the paper, I do want to take a minute to introduce my co-author, Kathy Bennett. Kathy and I worked for years together. She's an outstanding archivist, librarian, and researcher, and I was so grateful that she could play a role in this project. So please, Kathy, say hi to everyone, and thank you for your role in the project.
Thank you, Jim. It was a real pleasure, and hello, everyone. Jim had asked me to say a few words about the research. When we started the project, I was expecting that we were going to be on sort of ground that had already been covered, and that a number of reports and articles would show up in the searches, and some did, but not nearly what I was anticipating. So I do think that the research that will be presented today, it's not comprehensive, but it's really a strong collection on this subject. And I do hope that with the ability to continue building the database, that we'll be creating a reference that will be able to be used over time. And it will show how the union response has changed, is changing. And it's really, really quite interesting. And I guess just overall, and Jim will say a lot more on this, that what started out as looking at unions and tech change and collective agreement language turned into a really uplifting experience, that seeing that there's a very, very innovative approaches, and that unions are making a difference, and it was uplifting. So thank you, and back to you, Jim.
Kathy, thank you again for your role in the paper. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing the screen here, and we'll go through a few highlights of the report. Is technology the villain or the savior? That's the question that we get asked all along. And at the Center for Future Work, we get a lot of inquiries about technology and how it's going to change work, and whether robots are going to eliminate human beings, and whether we'll all be, slaves to an algorithm, or whether we'll all have so much leisure time we don't know what to do with it. So there's a kind of infatuation with technology as the driver of change in our society that, in a way, unfortunately, is not deserved. Clearly, technology could open up some incredible things in our work, some creative work, some autonomy, using new skills, being more productive, and thereby having a higher standard of living. But equally clearly, technology could make our lives hell. We could have a situation where our every single motion is directed and governed and measured by an algorithm, and where the work has become completely non-autonomous, where we're told precisely what to do, and that every second of the paid workday is used in a so-called value-added manner, with implications obviously for our physical health and safety, for our mental well-being, and for our full development as human beings. So is it the villain, or is it the savior, or is it neither? And I would say neither, frankly. I would say it all depends. And in all of our work at the Center for Future Work, we've really emphasized the need to reject this idea that technology is somehow driving the ship. Usually when you hear someone says it's all about technology, they're trying to trick us. They're trying to make us believe that there aren't human beings behind the green curtain, and that there's nothing that we can do about it, because after all, you can't stand in the way of technology. But when we analyze it and think about it, technology is not an exogenous force. It's not something beyond our control. Technology is an essentially human phenomenon. Humans have been developing technology since we descended from the trees somewhere in East Africa 200,000 years ago, because it is simply the compilation of human knowledge that we gather and then pass on to subsequent generations about how to work and how to produce and how to do things better. So whether technology hurts us or helps us completely depends on how it's done, and particularly the human decisions, not a technological force that's beyond our power. The human decisions that go into technology, including what ideas we're going to try and develop, what problems we're going to try and solve. Even the direction of technology is not exogenous. And then particularly how those ideas, once we have them, are implemented. Who gets to make those decisions and in whose interest? And that's what I think the conversation should focus on, not this idea that there's some kind of external force. This whole idea that I think takes up too much airtime, frankly, and is a bit of a distraction from problems that I think are more concrete and more immediate and more actionable. This fear that robots and automation and artificial intelligence are going to replace all our jobs and we'll experience some kind of mass technological unemployment. This is one I think that we have to kind of confront and think about, interrogate, not just dismiss, but think about what it actually means. Because in a general sense, it's simply not possible for machines to replace human beings in any kind of all-encompassing sense, because human beings literally are the only thing that adds value to the resources that we harvest from nature. The raw materials and energy and minerals that we were blessed with on this planet, and that we'd better start treating with more respect and find out how to use those resources more sustainably. From that point on, from the gifts of nature on, it is human beings, 100%, our brains and our brawn, our ability to do physical labor, our muscles, to move things, but also our ability to think and conceptualize and solve problems. Those dimensions of productive human labor are the only force that adds value in the economy, that drives it forward. And the whole idea of automation replacing that fundamentally misunderstands what automation is and where it comes from. Because the reality is the machines didn't descend on us from outer space. They were created. They were designed, conceived, manufactured, installed, operated, and maintained by human beings. Those human beings are now doing something different, what we call indirect labor, instead of some kind of direct labor at the point of production, but it's still human beings and it's still our labor. So instead of allowing this technological discussion to somehow position workers as a disposable input, something that we can do without because we'll get machines to do it better, I prefer to put human beings and workers in particular at the center of the discussion, and that's where we still are. There's a discussion in the paper that talks about technology and machines and where they come from anyway. And the reality is that everything that we produce in our economy can be decomposed ultimately into two things. Those free gifts of nature that I talked about, that we have to learn to manage in a more sustainable way, and then human labor, broadly defined, physical labor, mental labor, public sector, private sector, goods production, services production, highly skilled and qualified, and less skilled and qualified. One way or another, it's still human labor. And taking those two things is what produces everything that we have in the economy. Now, what happens with automation is simply that we're going to do a two-stage process, a kind of roundabout or indirect process, if you like. The first process is to use some human labor with the resources that we harvest from nature and then produce a tool in economics, the highfalutin term is an intermediate product, but and sometimes it's called capital goods. But at the end of the day, it's just a tool, something we made in order to make our work more efficient, because we've understood from the get-go that it's better to use tools than to try and produce something with our bare hands. Then, stage two, we take that tool and we combine it with more labor and usually some other additional resources from nature, and then we produce the end product that we were hoping for. So this idea that there's something in the middle, the intermediate product, a machine or a robot or a computer that can somehow replace us, doesn't make sense in a general sense, because human beings had to do that work in the first place. So we're maybe getting more of the indirect work to produce tools and less of the direct work on the end product, but it's still work. And the value that comes from that whole process is still created by human beings and our labor. This seems, in a way, ridiculously simple to somebody who hasn't studied economics. The problem is in conventional economics, they try to mystify this whole process, and they take that thing in the middle, intermediate products, and they call it capital, and they give it some kind of mysterious significance, and they pay money to the people who own it, not necessarily because they did anything, but just because they own it. And then that confuses the whole situation. But from a labor movement point of view, I think we have to reinforce the kind of initial insight, deceptively simple, but still subversive, that this economy cannot function without workers. We are not disposable. We cannot, in aggregate, be replaced. And the statistical evidence from Canada and around the world is quite clear that the fears about mass technological unemployment, the fears that workers in general could be replaced by machines, have not come to pass, even in 200 years since the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the spinning jenny and the steam engine and so on. There's lots of other things that go on. Yes, some jobs at the point of direct production can be eliminated or replaced with something else. But in the overall economy, labor is still critical. And we have not seen a phenomenon called mass technological unemployment in Canada or elsewhere, because there's lots of other things that go on. There's new jobs required to produce that machinery. There's new jobs that open up in industries that use the machinery. A good example today is the work in digital programming and programming apps for smartphones and other things that we didn't even know we could do until we had the machines and technology that enabled it. We can also, if our work is more productive, we can produce more than we used to. So that allows our total output to grow. And then a final one that we emphasize in this paper as an offsetting factor is the possibility that we could reduce our working hours in order to capture some of the benefits of productivity in leisure time rather than more stuff. All of those things together allow us to implement technology on the grand scale, on an economy-wide scale, without hurting employment. This is not to dismiss the fact that people are worried. And in our economy, which is based on precarity and insecurity as a goal of policy to keep workers worried, we can't blame workers for being worried. And in particular industries and occupations, they should be worried. There are huge disruptions and dislocations that occur. The question is, how do we manage those changes in ways that are fair and inclusive without pretending that it's all just driven by technology. We show some evidence in the paper about the generally positive relationship between machinery investment and job creation. So instead of workers being replaced by robots, in fact, job creation has tended to be stronger, mildly stronger, in Canada when business investment in machinery and equipment was strong. Now, right now, it's not strong. In fact, as I'll show you in a minute. It is true that technology can do incredible things, but another kind of popular conception that we should interrogate a little bit is this idea that technology is accelerating. For sure, we see some incredible videos on YouTube about things that robots can do. The one that keeps me awake at night, frankly, Barb, is the one that robot that can assemble an IKEA chair. Have you ever seen that one? The robot can take the IKEA chair right out of the box and put it all together, the Allen key, the whole bit. And I'll tell you that when my spouse saw that video, she started looking at me differently. Kind of like, I don't think I actually need that guy anymore. But at any rate, They do incredible things in laboratories, but how often do we actually see these things in the real world? Sometimes we do. And again, we can't dismiss that. But at the aggregate level, as measured by economy-wide data, there's no evidence that technology is accelerating, that productivity is skyrocketing, that robots and machinery are being implemented. In fact, business investment in technology in Canada has been miserable and getting worse. Productivity growth has slowed down, not sped up, which is what you would expect if robots were becoming more commonly used. And there's all kinds of very low-tech, low-wage, and generally very insecure jobs that are being created in this so-called high-tech economy. So some of the evidence in our report shows that business investment in new machinery and equipment has been falling steadily in Canada since the turn of the century. And investment even in intangible knowledge like research and development and software and code and other forms of intellectual property has also been falling, down by about a quarter as a share of GDP. Machinery investment is down by half as a share of GDP. So this is a sign that we're slowing down, not speeding up. And in fact, Canada's falling badly behind the rest of the world on this score. We were converging, but starting around the turn of the century, we started to, in a way, devolve. We started going backwards in terms of our technological sophistication as an economy, and I think this is a worrisome sign. It's not good for jobs that we aren't investing a lot in new tech. It's bad for jobs in the long run, and it's a failure of neoliberal trickle-down economics that this is happening. I'll point out that about the time that red line starts to turn around is exactly when Paul Martin introduced the first of many major corporate tax cuts, justified by the very idea that by cutting taxes, business would invest more in new machinery and innovation and more productivity. And exactly the opposite has happened. There's lots of things to talk about. I think the two main reasons why technology and innovation investment has been slowing down were the collapse of the dot-com bubble, the very financialized expansion of high tech with, remember, Nortel Networks and JDS Uniphase and the other high tech darlings ultimately taking BlackBerry down with them as well. And then that was also the time that in Canada, we suddenly became infatuated again with another boom in staples production and export, namely, in this case, petroleum. So we put all of our eggs in that basket. At any rate, it's clear that we need a better strategy for how we develop our technology and innovation. This is a worrisome sign. It's not good for our job security that we're so slow and falling behind the rest of the world in technology. But it is that's the topic for another paper in the PowerShare series, perhaps. This paper is talking about technology and how it is affecting and isn't affecting work. I'm less worried about negative impact of technology in the total quantity of jobs. I am more worried about the impact of technology on the quality of jobs, the quality of our work, the working conditions that people experience, the health and safety conditions that they experience, and the employment relationships that are embodied in our jobs. So this I think, opens the door for us to think, as we do in this paper, about how do workers have influence on technology and how it rolls out. And in terms of targeting improvements and protections in the quality of work, that's what we do as trade unions. So this, in a way, is a good fit. The impact of technology on quality of work is indeterminate. There are some things that could be positive. There are many things that could be negative. Some of the negative ones, you see technology being used to speed up production, to fragment tasks into little bits that are done over and over again, with all kinds of worries around ergonomics and health and safety. You also see some very important indirect effects, where the technology is not used to actually change the work that is done. What it is used for is to change the relationship between the people doing the work and the people employing them or paying to do the work. And this is really important to keep in mind, because we're always thinking, or always told, that technology is all about how efficient and productive we can be. Many types of new technology are implemented and invented precisely to change relationships, not to change work itself. And this is an important distinction to keep in mind, because it allows us to challenge some of the ways that technology is rolled out without making it look like we're opposed to progress. Lots of examples of how technology is used in things like outsourcing jobs, imposing all kinds of digital surveillance and performance monitoring, even affecting how much people get paid rather than what they actually do. Here's a couple of examples. Of course, there's the whole gig work phenomenon that we see in rideshare and food delivery, and spreading into other things, including caring and human services, if the employers are allowed to keep getting away with it. Now look at this job, delivering fast food on a bike. Is that a high-tech occupation? I think not. That's a pretty old tech occupation. Where does the technology come into this? The technology is on the rider's smartphone, which is where the boss tells them where to go and where to deliver the food and how much they're going to get paid for it. That's all about the relationship. It isn't about the work. You could pick up a restaurant meal on a bike a century ago. You're doing exactly the same thing you would have done a century ago. And the same is true of most other types of gig work. The work itself is not high tech at all. So when Uber and the others stand up and say this is all about technology, and you can't stand in the way of technology, and technology has meant that old-fashioned ideas like the minimum wage just don't apply anymore, get with the program. It's bullshit, if I can use the technical term in economics. They are trying to draw a high-tech veneer over a practice that is actually hundreds and hundreds of years old. If you study economic history, you can find all kinds of gig work. This is a picture of two women working in the so-called putting out system, as it was called in the 1800s in Europe, where they would pick up some basic materials like textiles, take it home, using their own machines, add value to it by making it into clothing or shoes or small housewares, then take it back, get paid for that work, and then hope that they get another gig. That is the gig economy. All they're missing is a smartphone, okay? So when they say that technology is driving this ship, no way. This is all about relationships and who has power. And we have organized our society right now in a way that allows Uber, billionaires who own a company that has never made a single dollar in profit, to employ people, whether they're called employees or not, they're still employing them to do lousy, dangerous, relatively low-tech work for very little pay, even less than the minimum wage. That isn't technology. That is society. And that is where we have to kind of focus our anger and our demands for change. Another indirect impact of technology on jobs I'm worried about is this use of digital surveillance and performance monitoring and keeping track of where people are, location tracking, and so on. In a way, it changes the calculation that employers typically face when they're trying to decide how much to pay someone. Do they want to use the carrot? That is a positive incentive to elicit productivity and loyalty and retention, or do they want to use the stick? That is the threat of discipline and ultimately dismissal. And employers have always faced a balancing act between those two. And with digital surveillance, the stick suddenly becomes effective, omnipresent, and cheap. Okay, you can put digital cameras anywhere. You can put GPS codes on people's identity cards. You can track how long they spend in the bathroom. You can watch them at home on the webcam to see if they're actually working when they're being paid at home. These are all things that are, first of all, offensive in terms of the dignity and privacy of workers, but they are also shifting the balance and the calculations that employers have to make when they're thinking about wages. And I think it is a factor in the weak growth of wages that has been experienced in our economy and other industrial economies in recent years. So these are just examples of the way that technology works in various ways. This is technology that just worked in my office. This is a automatic lights off system. There we go. I just have to wave my arms every half an hour or so to save energy, of course. Okay. Another thing to interrogate a bit is the kind of common infatuation with skills as being the solution for all of this. We do hear this from governments a lot. Yes, technology is going to create new jobs. It's going to eliminate others, but all you have to do is get the right skills and you'll protect yourself. I'm all in favor of skills. I'm all in favor of training. I want to see the resources match the rhetoric in terms of that, but we do have to be cautious. There's no guarantee that future jobs will even need more skills. As I mentioned, there's lots of low-tech, low-skill jobs being created out there. Millions of Canadians have skills that they're not using today. So this idea that we need more skills doesn't quite match. And as we're investing in people's skills, we also have to be creating jobs that they can use those skills in. That is the other side of the equation that has to absolutely be there, because just creating skilled workers itself doesn't create jobs. Really interesting information in the report. I encourage you to check out this. This is table 4 in the report in the massive PDF for those that are brave enough to look. This shows what the 12 fastest growing occupations projected by the federal government are over the next decade. Their most recent projections. And it's really surprising. Of the 12, 2, the ones in blue, are what you would consider traditional sort of high-tech jobs, ICT, computer programming, designers, et cetera, et cetera. So fine, 85,000 jobs across those 2. That's not the center of future job creation, though. The other sectors fall into 2 broad categories. Human and caring services that we want to have delivered through high quality public services are the dominant source of new work. 6 of the 12, accounting for 325,000 jobs just across those 6 in healthcare, education, and community services. So that tells you something about the jobs of the future. It isn't about learning coding, it's learning caring and getting the right skills and good quality jobs and the protection of a union so that you can do it right. The other category that is also way more important than computer programmers is what we would call precarious work in private services industries. So you'll see there in restaurants, cleaners, drivers, retail clerks, also major sources of new work. And we're going to need those things. I'm not for a minute saying they aren't important. We're going to need them. And we should, in the pandemic, we said they were essential services, working at a grocery store and cleaning. And driving. So we better start treating those people like essential workers by lifting the quality of their jobs. And thinking through this sort of detail, I think, challenges some of the techno hype that goes around a lot of these discussions. So thinking about technology, we argue it isn't evil and it isn't good. It is knowledge, and like anything else, it can be used to lift up human conditions or degrade them and oppress them. And it all depends on who's in charge, who's calling the shots about how technology is directed, what ideas we're going to try and come up with, and then particularly who's calling the shots when new technologies are implemented in workplaces. And the goal should be, we want more of the good effects and less of the bad effects. And that means elbowing our way into the discussions and the decisions where these things are determined. And that's where unions and collective bargaining come in. This is the kind of the meat and potatoes of our report, is the survey that Kathy really did the lion's share of the work on. And thank you again, Kathy, to assemble examples of how Canadian unions were trying to do exactly that, elbow their way into the decisions about how technology unfolds and how its effects are managed. So the database that's in the report was based on a survey of 40 different Canadian unions we approached. We also searched databases of collective agreements and arbitration decisions and other sources of information. And we identified 350 different technology-related provisions in Canadian collective agreements and organized them into 12 broad themes that are discussed in the report, along with information on labor legislation that discusses tech change and some of the major arbitration decisions, because of course everyone knows you can't just write it into the collective agreement and assume that's it. You've got to make sure that the language is clear enough and enforceable enough to actually hold when the employer challenges it. So this was our kind of a way of examining how are unions trying to shape the nature of technology, get more of the positives and less of the negatives. One thing that has to be said from the outset is kind of an overarching existential challenge is to preserve the ability to do that in the first place. And that means to preserve union density and the right to collective bargaining, which is under threat in Canada, particularly in the private sector. We've seen a decline in private sector trade unionism, trade union representation, and collective bargaining. And if we don't turn that around, then a lot of this discussion is moot. And our capacity to influence technological change will be sacrificed. So we have an agenda that will be familiar to most of our audience about ways that collective bargaining could be strengthened, and that has to be front and center in the demands that we make about shaping technology in better ways. private sector unionization down to around 16%. It's kind of leveled off the last couple of years. I hope that's the beginning of a turnaround. We saw actually an increase in overall union density in Canada during the pandemic, partly because of the increased importance of public sector work, where union density remains very strong. I mentioned that we grouped the 250 provisions into 12 different categories of contract language that discuss things like how do you define tech change, giving notice of tech change, establishing regular consultation committees and provisions for negotiating tech change, adjustment and job security provisions, severance pay, health and safety issues, and so on. So lots of detail there. And of course, the essence of negotiating is in the detail. That is to come up with language that's specific enough to actually make a difference and protect workers. Our general kind of overarching analysis of this, the whole appendix of provisions is hard to wade through, so we tried to give a bit of a guide. We found that unions are on the case, if I can say it generally like that. Not saying that they're perfect, not saying that there are things we could do better, but they're certainly addressing technological change, trying to shape it, not trying to stop it in a generic sense. This idea that unions are somehow like Luddites, resistant to change is nonsense. We actually found only one contract provision banning a technology, and that was from the employer's side. The employer was trying to ban personal electronic devices from the work site. So, this idea that unions are just standing in the way of change is nonsense. But we are trying to manage change in ways that reduce the dislocation for our members and improve the benefits for our members. Some of that happens through the regular language of any collective agreement on things like health and safety and severance and job classification. Some of it requires customized language around some of the new challenges. And as Kathy mentioned, we are seeing unions kind of rise to the challenge. One thing that we saw that was clearly missing from the union response to tech change was an absence of discussion about shorter work time. I mentioned at the outset that it is a way to manage tech change without creating unemployment. It also enhances the quality of life. It allows workers to get a better balance with their family responsibilities. It's good for the environment. So, this is, I think, one of our recommendations is that unions, it's hard slogging given the employer resistance to these demands and the general imbalance in bargaining power, especially in the private sector. But we do, I think, have to find ways to put this idea back on the agenda, and public opinion research says that Canadians like the idea. So we did make some recommendations at the end of our report. Governments should support the ability of workers to negotiate and engage in discussion technological change, including things like requiring tech change committees as a regular feature of firms above a certain size, and using their procurement power to encourage businesses to engage with their workers on technology. For unions, we suggested early warning capacity. Think about ways that unions can gather intelligence and get ahead of tech change that is coming to your workplace, because it's much easier to deal with ahead of time than after things have already been announced. And as I mentioned, put shorter working time back on the agenda. Our conclusion, just to wrap up, was cautiously optimistic. We think that there's potential for using technology in ways that lift living standards, that give us more time off, that give us safer jobs. But that won't happen by itself. It won't happen because of the inherent nature of technology. It will happen because we exercise enough influence through collective bargaining and other channels over technological change in ways that get more of the benefits and less of the costs. So cautiously optimistic, but not naive. Technology is contestable. It's a site of struggle over who is in charge and what technology will be used for. And that's exactly what unions do. We struggle. So thank you for your attention on that. And we're going to now invite two people who know all about trying to struggle over technological change, two great Canadian trade union leaders, to talk about their experiences in trying to negotiate tech change in their respective unions. And first, I'm very glad to introduce Sister Jan Simpson, who is the national president of the CUPW, the Postal Workers Union. We found as we were assembling our database, time and time again, we saw some extraordinary language in the CUPW agreements about protecting workers and ensuring that technology was used in certain ways. Jan, tell us a little bit about how you did that.
Thank you very much, Jim, for that opportunity. And thank you to everybody who's here this evening, afternoon, or whatever time zone you're in. So we want to thank you for inviting the Canadian Union of Postal Workers to discuss the impact of technological change on workers and the communities that we live in. I'm participating virtually today from the Indigenous territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga. I want to congratulate first Jim Stanford and Kathy Bennett for producing their paper on technological change. The paper will be used by trade unionists for many years, maybe even decades, as a manual about how to approach issues of new technology. I think the paper is especially important and relevant. Not only do we need to use collective agreements and bargaining to protect our members, we also need to develop strategies to shape tech change to benefit our members. And the title of your paper is really important and really shows that. A new technology should result in better and safer working conditions, and workers should receive a share of the productivity increases in the form of increased wages and improved benefits. I totally agree with your conclusion that the final impact on workers depends on whose interests and priorities shape technology and its applications. I want to thank you again for this immense contribution that you've made. CUPW, we have a long history of a struggle to ensure workers' rights are respected when technology is introduced. When people think of postal workers, they see a letter carrier on the street, but technological change is not the first thing that you think of or that you see. But when you pull the curtain on the operations of a mail delivery service, it is not hard to see how the method of getting a letter, a parcel, or even a flyer from point A to point B can be changed dramatically with the advent of technology. Let me take a few minutes first to go through some of the key moments in our history where technological change became a major issue for workers. So in the 1970s, the production process was completely transformed from manual sortation to mechanized sort. In 1975, CUPW organized bargaining around the slogan, "This is the year for postal workers to share in the benefits of automation." We had a 42-day strike in 1975, and it resulted in providing language change in the collective agreement on tech change. This was the birth of Article 29, which provides, firstly, a broad definition of tech change. It also has a provision for notice, including effects on workers. There was a process of negotiations based on the principle, there shall be no adverse effect on workers. It's Article 2902 in our collective agreement. And I'm glad you referenced this aspect in your paper on page 50 and 51. Yes, I've started reading the paper for sure, as I believe it is one of the most important provisions in our collective agreement. We also negotiated a process of third-party arbitration if there is no agreement. And we also included in this full job security, retaining and relocating allowance. Our approach to tech change also included the following principles, which are very important. First, all health and safety hazards would be identified and addressed, such as noise and dust levels, night work, weight limits, repetitive strain injuries, hourly coder breaks, and rotation of duties. We also want to ensure that technology is not used to violate the privacy of workers or impose overburdening or speed up. And we heard Jim mention that in his presentation earlier on. So in the 1980s, we negotiated a prohibition of individual work measurement. And in 1981, we negotiated protections from the use of surveillance cameras to be used for disciplinary purposes. We must also ensure the work was performed by our members with full-time jobs. We tried our best to maximize the number of full-time positions and that part-time only for part-time work where it was required. And in 1992, we negotiated a national ratio guaranteeing the percentage of good full-time jobs. We also share in the benefits of automation. We were not successful in 1975, but in 1978, we attempted to negotiate a shorter workday with no loss in pay, but we were legislated back to work. But in 1980, we were successful in reducing the workday by 30 minutes with no loss in pay. We were able to acquire a paid meal period. We also included and introduced a 6th and 7th week of vacation in our collective agreements. In 1984, we negotiated pre-retirement leave and additional paid holidays for night workers. It's also very important to contract in work wherever possible. We have been very successful in contracting in plant maintenance work and vehicle maintenance works as well. And also in 2003, we negotiated the contracting in of parcel delivery, which has been contracted out during the previous conservative government. And where possible, we need to find ways of using technology to also benefit workers. We also took the approach that the benefit of automation should be shared with the public by increasing postal services. So in 1984, we negotiated and included in our collective agreement provisions for the opening of new post offices and new sales of postal-related products at the wicket counters. In 1992, we negotiated a special joint committee, which is called the Appendix D Committee, and it has funds that allows us to conduct pilot projects, providing new services or contracting in work. Today, we are addressing issues such as expansion of financial services at postal counters and the potential for a new service where people could arrange for letter carriers to check in on seniors and other people who live alone. As many of you know, in 2013, the Harper government announced that Canada Post would be the first postal administration in the world to stop all residential mail delivery and replace door-to-door delivery with community mailboxes. This would have resulted notably in thousands of job losses. Together with our allies from the labor movement and seniors organizations, and with the support of the NDP and the Green Party, we were successfully, and we fought off the back and stopped the conversion to the community mailboxes. From our experience in this struggle, we realized that we need to develop a comprehensive plan for a green and service-oriented postal service, one that would not only be a leader in the fight against climate change, but also provide postal banking, services to the elderly, and high-speed internet in areas that are currently lacking and essential services. And we know the pandemic really highlighted the importance of these before mentioned items. So to promote this vision, we've worked with our sister union, the Canadian Postmasters and Assistants Association, as well as LEAP and other allies to produce our vision, delivering community power. Today, we have 8 coordinators working full-time to promote this vision, and we already have over 1,000 municipalities who've adopted resolutions supporting postal banking and expansion of our services. I would also like to say a few words about the use of technology and gig workers in the delivery sector, as Jim also mentioned in his presentation earlier on. So last year in Ontario, CUPW won a decision at the Ontario Labour Relations Board that ruled that even though gig workers in the delivery sector bring their own cars and bikes in order to do the work, the app they use is the primary tool for work, and it is a tool of the employer. This enabled us to win employee status and collective bargaining rights for these workers. We have seen that in other countries, such as Norway, couriers have successfully fought for and won collective agreements that provide for flexible schedules, which some workers want, as well as stability and benefit rights. Throughout CUPW's history, we believe that its employers are to have the right to introduce new technology. With change the work process during the life of the collective agreement, they must negotiate the introduction with the following principles. All adverse effects must be identified and eliminated. Full-time job opportunities must be maximized. Health and safety should be improved. Workers and communities should share in the benefits of the changes. I want to thank you again for the great report. I look forward to the discussion and the other presentations. Thank you.
Jan, that was awesome. Thank you so much. And thank your union as well for just the incredible language. I do invite people to read the details of the report and several references to CUPW language. That's outstanding. Next, I'd like to introduce Bob Dollywell, is the Secretary-Treasurer for ILWU Canada. And longshore work is one industry where technology has just, I guess you could say, run amok. Bob, in terms of the risks and challenges that it poses to your members, tell us how you've tried to wrap your arms around it and protect your members and the communities where they live.
Right, thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for joining this webinar. Thanks to Jim for inviting, and thanks to Jan for joining me on this panel. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We are on this. I'm dialing in from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. The ILW Canada, we represent related workers on the west coast of BC. We also have some affiliates in Saskatchewan. Now, automation, the main area of concern for ILW Canada and automation have been in the longshore division, and in particular the container sector. The bulk sector has already been highly automated, and break bulk is hard to automate, or some goods have already been shipped to containers. Currently, the container sector accounts for approximately 70% of longshore work hours. We have seen an ever-increasing adoption of technology and digitization and automation in the container terminals around the world for the past 28 years. The first automated container terminal was in Rotterdam in 1993, and the second in Hamburg in 2002. The technology has improved and gained acceptance over the years and moved to other areas, including Asia, Australia, and more recently in North America. The recent automation efforts, especially in LA Long Beach, were what convinced our members and executives that we needed to address automation in our last contract, which ended in March of 2018. For example, the Long Beach container terminal uses about 70% less labor than an equivalent manned terminal. Some of our executives visited the terminal in 2018, and the high level of automation was very concerning. During bargaining, we agreed that we had to get new language around automation. The BCMA, or British Columbia Employers Association, which bargains on behalf of the employers, didn't seem to think that there was any need for new language. They believed that an older agreement around modernization and mechanization was still relevant. It pays members a lump sum amount on retirement. Basically, they felt that they had already bought and paid for automation. The union felt that automation is distinctly different from mechanization, and that job losses are much more significant. The bargaining for this contract, last contract, took over a year and a half, and it was very contentious. The automation language was the final stumbling block to get agreement. In the end, the employer locked us out. The labor minister was already in town by that time, and when the lockout started, an agreement was reached in the wee hours of the morning. The lockout only lasted 2 hours, and only one shift was lost. The exact language that we obtained is in the document, and I won't go into it in detail, but what we got was prior notification of automation and a committee to be formed to discuss mitigation efforts, the negative effects. Lessons learned. We learned that we were smart to be proactive about this issue, but what we achieved was only the start. The language obtained is insufficient. Through my research over the last few years, I've discovered that terminals make these investment decisions many years in advance. And by the time we're going to be informed of automation, the equipment is already bought, it's on the way, and the jobs are lost. The only hope for us in the future is negotiating new jurisdiction and getting good manning agreements on the terminals where automation is concerned. We've also increased our efforts in organizing new workers into the union and broadened our scope. We know that any new terminal that will be built will have a significant amount of automation. The main factors that are pushing automation include larger ships, the equipment manufacturers pushing automated equipment as a solution to surge problems created by these mega vessels, and regulation around climate change and greenhouse gas reductions. Retrofitting old terminals is also gaining traction and requires less capital. The terminals can be automated one block or one section at a time. The technology is improving daily. AI and machine learning are becoming keys to further improvements, along with 5G. This is going to be an ongoing struggle. We have used every lever to preserve jobs and gain union jurisdiction. I have been working with a special committee of the International Transport Workers Federation to figure out strategies for dock workers unions to combat automation globally. We have just completed an automation toolkit designed to help affiliates in their struggles with automation. It is being distributed to all the global affiliates in the ITF. I would advise unions to keep up with upcoming technology that could affect their jobs and try to bargain language ahead of time to protect jobs of their members. Automation is coming in many industries, and we must be vigilant. I could go on about automation for a long time, but Jim only gave me 5 hours, so thank you very much, and I look forward to questions.
I'm going to draw things to a close now. I want to thank Jim, Kathy, Jan, and Bob for the important discussion today. I want to thank everybody from the audience. There is a ton of suggestions and questions in there and examples as well. So I know that Jim and Kathy will be following up on those. You can continue to get a hold of the Center for Future Work. And what we want to ensure is that you visit the website centerforfuturework.ca to see that full report. We call on you to sign up for the mailing list to learn about future publications and events. And I know that I have a whole list of things that, Jim, I'd like to come back at all of you with on the question of, the shorter work week and how are we going to deal with the workers wanting to disconnect themselves as well, but also wanting to stay connected. I've had it told to me that don't send me delayed sends for Monday morning, send them to me on the weekend, even though I'm trying to guard their family time. I think you've really laid out for us the whole question of this dance we do between fear and denial on change, and that we need to get ahead of the game and into the game on that. And we need to motivate, we need to create the discussion. And that there is so much more to say tonight and for many nights to come. So I would like to thank again the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the Atkinson Foundation for their support for the PowerShare project. Thanks everybody who has been participating tonight, and a special thanks to Jim, Kathy, Jan, and Bob, and apologies to those of you I didn't get to your questions or comments, but we would have Bob, I don't know whether you realized at the end of your presentation, you said Jim only gave you 5 hours instead of 5 minutes. We would have needed 5 hours. So in order to get to all of this. So to the next 5 hours, Jim, and the Center for Future Work.
And Barb, we can't finish without thanking you for your role in chairing and helping us organize this great panel. Thank you, Barb.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity. I loved it. I've got a lot of questions, though. Okay, are we ready to sign off? Thanks, everybody. Take care, stay safe, and get working on all those recommendations.